listening to the Caffeinated Thoughts Podcast. Hi, this is Shane Vander Hart. Welcome back to another episode. Thank you for listening. This week I wanted to highlight Iowa Senate District 1's Republican primary race. This is something I would like to do leading up to the June 5th primaries, highlight different contested primaries, and try to get candidates in to call in for an interview. Senate District 1 is a three-way primary. They're Brad Price from Spirit Lake, Zach Whiting, also from Spirit Lake, and Jesse Wolf from Emmitsburg, all filed to compete in the primary. They're competing to be able to receive the Republican nomination to challenge the incumbent state senator, David Johnson. You may remember Johnson was a Republican, but after President Trump was nominated by the Republican Party, he left the Republican caucus. So he's independent. So he doesn't have a primary. He just needs to collect enough signatures to be able to compete in the general election. So basically, you will have a Republican challenger and David Johnson. There's no Democrat running in this particular district, at least unless they have one that gets nominated by convention. There's nobody that's competing in the primary. No Libertarian candidate competing in the primary either. So most likely it's going to be the Republican challenger and State Senator David Johnson. This district is the second most Republican district in the state, at least with Senate districts anyway. So it's going to be interesting to see how the power of incumbency, because generally speaking in Iowa we tend to love our incumbents, how that stands up to Republican brand. Basically, David Johnson, on the life issue, he's been extremely good. On other issues, not. Sometimes he leans more to the Democratic Party. Probably one of the reasons why the Democrats aren't running a candidate in this particular district race, because if they did, that would make it even more likely that Senator Johnson would lose his reelection bid. But it'll be interesting to watch. A little bit later on, I have a phone conversation with Zach Whiting. He and I talked actually yesterday afternoon about his candidacy, where he stands on different issues, and why he wants to serve the people of Iowa Senate District 1. I also reached out to the other two Republican candidates and plan to have them on as well. And I'll plan on doing this with as many contested primaries as I can prior to June 5th. So without further ado, here's a word from our sponsors and then conversation with Zach Whiting.
At American Principles Project, we believe that human dignity should be at the heart of public policy. We work in all 50 states and in Washington, D.C. to promote life, religious freedom, local control over education, authentic economic progress for working Americans, and a return to constitutional principles such as federalism. Want to help American Principles Project? Visit our website today, AmericanPrinciplesProject.org. That's American Principles, PLES, Project.org. Sign up for email updates. Help us out. We want to work with you. That's AmericanPrinciplesProject.org.
Hi, this is Bryon Myers. When I needed a better life insurance plan, I found it with Travis Risvold of Modern Woodmen of America. When I first met Travis, he wasn't like some other life insurance agents that can be pushy and try to get you to buy something. Travis just made himself available to me. That was it. He told me to let him know if and when I needed anything, and he stayed in touch. When the day came and I did need to make some changes with my life insurance, Travis met with me and walked me through several options so I could make an informed decision. Ultimately, it was the best decision for my situation. So if you need a life insurance plan that makes sense for you, call my friend Travis Risvold with Modern Woodmen. His number is 515-883-0029. That's Travis Risvold with Modern Woodmen. He can help you find the life insurance you need. Call him at 515-883-0029.
And I'm back. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Zach Whiting. All right. Hey, Zach, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us. First of all, I just wanted to ask you,
This is a question I ask all candidates. Why do you want to run, or why are you running?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a great question. So for me, I'm running to serve the people of District 1 and ensure that they have effective conservative leadership and restore that to this seat. It's the second most Republican Senate district in the state of Iowa, and it's currently not represented by a Republican or by someone who is conservative on any issue but life. So I'm running to be a conservative Republican alternative and restore those conservative values to this seat and for the people of this district.
So tell me a little bit about yourself. What, just maybe a short bio, what qualifications you have, education experience, things like that.
Sure. So I'm originally from Spirit Lake, and I'm a fifth-generation Northwest Iowan. My family has deep roots that go back a long ways on agriculture and education, community and public service. I graduated from Spirit Lake High School, and then I attended Stetson University in Central Florida and got a bachelor's degree in political science, and then attended law school at the Regent University Law School in Virginia Beach, also known as Pat Robertson's Law School.
Yep.
And got a wonderful, wonderful education there, and took and passed the bar. And then right after I graduated from law school, not right after, but a couple months after, I took a job with the office of Congressman Steve King out in Washington, D.C., and I worked out there for a little over two and a half years or so as his judiciary legislative assistant. So I assisted him in his position on the House Committee on the Judiciary, and when he was the chairman of the Executive Overreach Task Force, handled some other issues, telecommunications, transportation, some healthcare stuff, things like that. And then my current position, I serve as a policy advisor to Congressman King, so I still do some of that policy work. I'm based out of the district here in Spencer.
Okay. So I just want to drill down on some policy. For instance, looking at K-12 education, education in general takes up a huge chunk of the state general fund, approximately 57% that's K-12 funding, as well as Regents University and community college funding. What is your view on local control in education? What does that look like from a state policymaking perspective to you?
Sure. So I think local control of education is a very important thing. I think our school districts here in Northwest Iowa are very good school districts. There's a lot to offer to the students whose parents choose to attend a public school here. There's also some private alternatives and some homeschooling opportunities. So I'm a school choice proponent, but on the public school side of things, as a state senator, I want to take a very close look at how we fund education in the state. As you mentioned, it takes up a huge chunk, the single largest piece of in the budget. And so I want to make sure that we're spending our money wisely. Every year we hear, well, we're starving the schools, we're not giving schools enough, even though Iowa has demonstrated over the years a great investment in education, increasing spending 15-20% here over the last 10 years or so. And so the state is spending a lot of money on education. We want to make sure that those outcomes that we're getting are good, and that in the grand scheme of things that we're giving our students the best education possible. And whether a family decides to send their kid to a public school, we want to make sure they're getting a great education, or that they have opportunities for private homeschooling. Regardless, we want our students to be well educated, well-rounded, and very importantly, workforce ready, so that kids who want to graduate from high school can transition to the workforce with, whether they go to a career or a technical vocational school, maybe a community college, or they have some apprenticeships opportunities while they're still in high school, or if kids decide to take the 4-year route and get a 4-year degree. Either way, we want our students to be ready to transition to college or transition to the workforce.
Okay, well, let me follow up on that. I know there's been it's kind of a huge rallying cry among education reformers to really push workforce development, but some of us who have been watching education policy see that has come as a detriment to courses that are not STEM focused, like civics, like English, like the arts, and we've seen a trend away from classical education toward workforce development. It's not obviously happened overnight, but what's your view on that? Considering too that the state is pushing state standards on local schools, kind of goes back to the local control question too. But so anyway, I'll let you answer.
Sure. So, we also have to look at, education as not being as something that you only go to school to get, that our families also have responsibility for teaching and raising up their children and our young people. So, there's, I think that a sort of a classic, well-rounded education is very important. I think taking courses in civics and history and even courses in religion are very important. And those are things that should be taught in the classroom. And so we only have a finite number of years and a finite number of classes and hours that we can fit into a day for education.
Right.
So I don't want to see the sort of the classical education necessarily hindered with this pursuit of STEM and to have these workforce ready education paths implemented. But those two things, if we can find that right balance to make sure that people have a rounded education in all areas, but then also at home, it comes from that as well. As we would like to see families talking about these things at home, but also helping their kids to achieve practical life skills beyond sitting in front of a computer or an iPad all day, which again, there's a lot of good jobs that require you to sit in front of a computer and iPad all day, but to learn how to, fix a lawnmower, fix a carburetor, get underneath the hood of a car, those are things that we can learn at home as well. And so if we can find that right balance to know that it is not the state that is the sole provider of education for young people, but that families and school districts and education can work together in concert. And I think that goes back to the point you're raising about local control, is rather than having these, I know it's the state that pays, a lot of the money towards education, but as long as we're not having pure top-down directives from the state and that we can give that control back to our local school districts, they're the people that we elect to the school boards that we elect to represent us and our values before the school district. And those people we know, we go to church with them, we work with them. And so I want to give them a great deal of latitude to be able to decide education policy for the district. And if they're doing a great job, that's wonderful. And if they're not, we can vote them out of office and put new people in there. That's how the system works. But I want to see the system work together in concert between families, local schools, and make sure that education is a lifelong pursuit and not something that we just get up in the morning and go from 8 to 4 during the school day and then come home.
Last education question, we'll move on. What's your view of Common Core, next generation science standards, and top-down education standards like those? Should they be repealed?
I'm opposed to Common Core top-down standards, whether they come from Washington, D.C. or Des Moines. Goes back to that local control, that the people closest to in our communities are better in touch with the communities and the population and the students and the families there. And so we want to be able to see, I want to be able to see those schools decide for themselves the best things that they want to do. If a large school district or any school district for that matter wants to yoke itself to Des Moines controlled education standards or Washington, D.C. standards, then I'll say do so at your own peril, but that's your choice. But up here in Northwest Iowa, if we want to take a different approach and not have liberal education and bizarre things on evolution and LGBTQ rights and all this stuff shoved down our throats and sexual perversions in the form of sex education taught to our students, then the local school district, the parents should have a greater deal of say in that rather than the state. The state can provide the funds, the school board and the people can be good stewards of that, but I don't think that pure top-down control from Des Moines is the right fit for anyone, and most certainly not for people up here in Northwest Iowa.
Okay, you mentioned your current state senator, David Johnson, is he's conservative only in the area of life. What kinds of policies and legislation would you support in promoting life in the state of Iowa?
Mm-hmm. So I believe that life begins at conception and deserves fundamental constitutional protection. And so I'm heartened to see that we're having conversations at both the federal and the state level on bills like the 20-week pain-capable bill is what they call it out in D.C.
Mm-hmm.
I would vote for that bill. I am heartened to hear the discussion, and I hope that they will take some action on the heartbeat bill in the Iowa legislature. I would support and vote for that. And with the goal of all this being working towards protecting life from conception. That's the goal of all of it. But I won't take such a scorched-earth approach to say I would vote against pain-capable or heartbeat to get to conception.
Great.
But I do support protecting life from conception. I don't support abortion exceptions for rape or incest. I do feel that a doctor in, for example, the middle of labor, having to perform an operation to save the life of the mother. I don't think we should have to lose two lives in a certain case, but that needs to be a very, very, very narrow. I don't even want to call it an exception.
Right.
But don't support abortion, and I don't support provide tax dollars to abortion providers like Planned Parenthood. I'm very excited to hear the news that the federal government is not going to punish states for if they choose not to fund abortion providers. That was a concern for state legislators that I've been in contact for a number of years. For going back 3 or 4 years, they wanted to defund Planned Parenthood, and the governor, Bryon, said at the time was concerned that they would lose some federal dollars through Medicaid. We don't have that concern anymore. We can go forward. We can protect life. We can defund abortion providers. People that want full range healthcare options have them plentiful options across the state, and we don't need to subsidize places like Planned Parenthood and abortion factories in the name of women's healthcare when there are plenty of superior high class healthcare options all across the state of Iowa.
Okay. There's currently a Religious Freedom Restoration Act that just kind of stalled out in the Iowa Senate. What's your view of religious freedom? How do you think the state should protect it? And I guess what kind of bills would you support if you were elected?
Yeah, so I think protecting religious freedom is absolutely fundamental. It's in the First Amendment, and it's in our First Amendment to the United States Constitution. We have a great history of religious freedom and protecting religious freedom here in the United States. It was people escaping what they felt was a religious oppression and tyranny to come and later set up what are these United States. And so I think that's very important that we do protect religious freedom and for people of all religious faiths. So I want to take measures to protect those that are under attack for expressing their views and their beliefs. I want to see pastors not be and churches not be threatened and stifled from speaking and their First Amendment rights and beliefs. That doesn't mean we need to turn the pulpit into political office, but pastors are people that have First Amendment rights too, and their rights should not be silenced or stifled. And we need to, I think we need to take a broader look at our society and the rhetoric and things that's used and there's this, idea that I think there's a concerted effort out there to stifle the speech free speech rights and beliefs of people of faith and that have conservative views and leanings on things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the effort is, if you can just shut those people up and they go away, then the left and the people that are propagating this can control the language and the narrative. And I think that's a very dangerous thing. We look at, for example, the Parkland shooting incident and what those students are out saying.
Mm-hmm.
They absolutely have a protected First Amendment right to do so. But for me, for example, or others to speak up and say, using my First Amendment to say, hey, I want to protect what is also an equally protected right, Second Amendment,
Right.
that is no less valuable or protected speech. And so if somebody says something like, hey, we need to protect the Second Amendment or gun rights, then we're somehow called out as being insensitive, mean, cruel, or rotten towards the victims of that. And that's most certainly not the case. So the First Amendment is a two-way street. I have a pretty broad view on the First Amendment, particularly on speech issues.
Uh-huh.
But going back to your question on religious liberties, those are things that we need to work to protect, and things like RFRA are a good step to do that. And I hope that if it has stalled out this year, that it's something that we can look to take up next year if I'm elected.
Okay. Tax reform the House is actually having a public forum today on their tax reform bill. The Senate, I believe, already passed tax reform bill. What would be your ideal tax? What do you think the ideal tax environment in Iowa should look like? If you could get anything you'd like, what would be your dream tax environment for Iowa?
Well, so the dream tax environment would be no taxes on anything ever.
Yeah, realistically, I guess.
But realistically, we do need tax dollars to perform the essential functions of government. And so I think that in Iowa we tax too much, and I think in Iowa we spend too much. I ran for the Iowa House back in 2010, and the budget back then was somewhere around $5.5 to $6 billion or something like that. Now we have revenue estimates coming in that are upwards of $7.5 billion. And so in that short period of time, we've increased revenue $1.5 or $2 billion. And so when I hear a number like the Iowa Senate Republicans throw out, say we want to do $1 billion of tax reform, everyone gasps and thinks we're going to have to fire all the teachers. No one's ever going to have a fire department to come put out their fires. There's
Right.
going to be no cops in the streets, and none of that is true. What we need to do as state legislators is be the stewards of the taxpayers' money. And so I would like to see our income tax rates cut. I would like to see our corporate tax rates cut. We have a very bad corporate tax environment and a very bad corporate tax ranking in Iowa. And so people are moving in droves to states like, for example, South Dakota. And people say, well, no state income tax, but maybe there's a higher, effective tax rate on, sales tax, consumer goods, property tax. But the perception is that South Dakota is the place that you want to move. So what I want to see is to change the tax code so that we are incentivizing people and businesses to move to Iowa, to set up shop here. We have a tremendous quality of life. We have a low cost of living. We, of course, as I travel around, one of the big issues that we hear locally is say, well, we need more affordable housing options. I would set up a business here, but where are my people gonna work? And I also we need to bring more people here to work. And so if we can adjust the tax code to achieve those things, the goal in all of it is for economic growth and to make Iowa a more attractive place for families, for individuals, for corporations to come and do business. So lowering those tax rates are important. I think one thing that we do need to look at as well, it's a source of revenue, but I think it needs to be discussed in the broader tax reform package, is how we handle internet sales tax. It's a 1992 Supreme Court opinion that has people all up in arms about what sort of nexus do you have and how do you tax somebody. I support an effort which I would essentially call a destination approach. That is, if someone wants to buy something on the internet, you pay sales tax in the state in which it is delivered. So if somebody wants to go on Walmart.com and order something rather than going to their local Walmart store, They go to Walmart.com, they buy it, it gets shipped to Des Moines, Iowa, and you pay taxes to the state of Iowa. So those are things that need to be part of the broader discussion. But we're spending too much, and we need to cut taxes. We need to cut spending. And if I could just bring in this point as well,
sure.
We need to do some budget reform that I think goes along with that. And we have this revenue.
That was going to be my last question.
Okay, well, good. Well, maybe I'll let you go ahead and ask that.
Well, no, I mean, you brought up spending. We need to cut our spending, and you noted the growing budget. How should we address it? What would that look like to in your mind?
Yep. So the first thing is on the revenue estimating process. I think we need to reform that process. I've heard numbers that somewhere between 30 and 40 states, something like that, use a similar approach to estimating revenue, and this is not a criticism of any of the members of the REC, but I'm saying we need to do this process differently. We have seen over the last 10 years, it was back in 2008, 9, 10, and recently here, that was when Democrats were in control. We've seen it in the last few years with Republicans in control, where we estimate the revenue, we set up our budget, and then we have to do mid-year budget cuts. I think that's wrong, and we need to reform the process so that doesn't happen. Maybe we just need to spend a smaller percentage instead of 99. Maybe we spend 96, 97% initially. Wait until the revenues actually come in, and if there's a great windfall, if we get all this, we have growing revenues in Iowa. They're just not growing as fast as they're estimating. So if we can just adjust how we budget and how we spend, so that we don't have to pull the rug out from people and cut funding mid-year. But if we had this great windfall, we could either increase their budgets, which I'm sure a lot of Democrats would like and support, or a lot of people would maybe say, what if we return that money back to the people? Maybe it's a small amount, but I think those are the types of things that we can show to the people of Iowa as stewards of their taxpayer dollars, that we're going to do the right thing. We're not going to it's not the government's money, it's theirs. We are taking it from them and using it to perform these essential services, which are important, but we need to take a strong look at the budget and say, if we were spending $2 billion less 10 years ago, what are we spending all this money on? What are we getting for it? And is there anything out of the budget that we can trim and cut? To do that, I think there are, and I want to take a look very carefully at every line of the budget to see, is there anything that we can cut? Waste, fraud, abuse, duplication, any of that stuff that can come out while still ensuring that the people of Iowa have good services, public safety, good education system, all of those things.
Yep. Just a follow-up question. When they passed property tax reform, they promised backfilling city and county budgets. Some cities and counties I know need that. Some don't. Should that practice be reformed?
Yeah, I do think that it should. As we've heard bipartisan members of the legislature describe it as something that was never intended to be a permanent thing. And if you go look at that pie chart of what the budget is, that takes up a significant amount of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's something that we need to look at. But what we need to be very careful of is if that goes away, it needs to be phased out carefully, thoughtfully, and slowly. And maybe there are areas of the state that don't need that. Maybe those property values have gone up, and they're seeing a great increase in revenue from property taxes. And if they were to keep getting any backfill payments, they would be having a glut of money come in. If they don't need it, maybe those are the places that we can start to phase it out. And for the places that still need that have lower overall property assessments and values, maybe we need to keep the backfill in place a little longer. But I do support phasing out the backfill over time. As I read into the history of this, it was never intended to be a permanent, what in DC speak we would call mandatory spending. It was never intended to be a permanent issue. And so if it is temporary, then at some point we do need to work to phase that out. And see what we can do. I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want to hurt any community, particularly in rural Northwest Iowa. But at some point, I think that's something we're going to have to take a look at.
Okay. Just you're in a three-way primary. Just closing arguments. Why voters Republican voters in Senate District 1 should vote for you over the other two guys, and where can people learn more about your candidacy?
Sure. So you can learn more about me by visiting my website, which is zachforiowa.com, or we have a Facebook page. You can search Zach Whiting for Iowa Senate. And as I look at this, I've been at this for over a year and a half. I've been out campaigning. We've worked harder than anyone. What I say on the campaign trail, I'll say to you right now, and I mean this, no one will be more conservative or work harder than I will to earn your vote. And that's been my motto from the very beginning. I have set out to be the most conservative person in this race. At the time, there was no one in the race. Now we have two others, so we have a three-way primary. We've worked very hard. We walked in 12 parades over the last year. We've knocked on several thousand doors. I regularly attend community activities, meetings, and events. I've been out and met with thousands of constituents across District 1 to learn about the issues that are important to them, and that's the amount of effort that it takes. You've got to go out and meet with the people and learn what the people of your district want, so that you can be representative of them and their values. I've been able to do that with the hard work that we've put into it, and couple that with my own personal beliefs and convictions. I will approach things as a strong conservative. I'll represent the conservative values of this district, and I want to see the people of the second most Republican Senate district in the state of Iowa represented by a Republican again, and more importantly, represented by a strong conservative again. And so that's my promise to the people. I'll work harder than anyone in this race. I'll be more conservative than anyone in this race, and I would be honored to have your vote in the Republican primary on June 5th.
All right. Hey, thank you so much for your time, Zach. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Shane. I appreciate you calling.
Not a problem. Take care, man.
All right. Take care. Bye now.
And that concludes this episode of the Caffeinated Thoughts Podcast. As I mentioned before, I do plan on bringing the other two candidates in Iowa Senate District 1's Republican primary on to talk about their campaigns and where they stand on the issues. So keep your eyes out for that. In the meantime, if you happen to be listening to this podcast somewhere other than on our website, be sure to check out caffeinatedthoughts.com. Again, that's caffeinatedthoughts.com. Or you could just Google Caffeinated Thoughts. It'll show up at the top of your search screen. Until next time, my friends, this is Shane Vander Hart. Take care.